It is Monday, October 8th, 2018. This is 3000 NFL Mock Draft, a podcast about the Seattle Seahawks, where myself, Kenneth Arthur of Field Goals, and Rob Staten of SeahawksDraftBlog.com get together to talk about the Seahawks, the NFL, the college football matchups, the NFL draft, the stuff going on in the world today. And today we're going to be talking about the Seahawks as they lose to the Rams 33-31 on Sunday, week 5. Seattle drops to 2-3, but given that the Rams are 5-0 and easily the best team in the NFC and arguably the NFL, it's really only between them and the Chiefs at this moment. As we've seen last year with the Chiefs, that can change pretty quickly. So, we'll see how things progress. But the Seahawks do play well against the LA Rams, well enough to, get in position to almost maybe kick a field goal that would have given them a lead. But play well. A lot of people expected a blowout, which, they come off week 4, perhaps their worst game of the season, even though it's a win against the Arizona Cardinals. They come back, they play the Rams. Maybe they prove a little bit that playing at home does matter for them, and that's encouraging, given that they do have a lot of home games coming up. And their next game is not a home game for either team, really. Technically, it will be for the Raiders, but not really a home game. They will be traveling to London to play the Raiders this week. So Rob, being a resident of England, will be able to give us, some of that 411, which, Rob, is information here in the States. That's what you dial for information. Don't know what it is. And by the way, I don't know if that's a thing that still exists, but I guess it depends how many people still have landlines and rotary phones. But we're going to get into rotary phones. Trust me about that. And we'll be talking about that game. But starting out with the Seahawks versus the Rams, obviously, Rob, something that we talked about all offseason, something you've talked about all offseason, is Seattle's commitment to the running game and how they were going to do that differently this season as opposed to the last couple, and that they were going to get their running back on track. And they did that on Sunday. They've committed to that run game in the last couple of weeks, but it was really successful against the Rams. What did you see against the Rams for the Seattle offense that you really liked? And how much of it do you think had to do with the Rams defense? Do you think that there's some concerns for the Rams in terms of their defense because they've given up 31 points in each of the last 2 games?
Well, the Rams certainly do have some issues, I think, in the secondary, and the fact that Marcus Peters kept getting torched is going to be an issue for them. They don't seem to have the quality defensive backs, and I think Minnesota and Seattle did a good job trying to limit the damage up front, which is obviously their main strength with Sue and with Brockers and with Aaron Donald, of course. But I think all of the praise I'd rather sort of just give to the Seahawks and the offense. I thought it was a really great offensive performance. I think the main positive for me is that the offensive line is now a major strength in the team. For years and years, people have complained about the offensive line, and with good reason in some cases, especially last year, it wasn't good enough. And the scheme wasn't good enough. I think that being a pure zone blocking scheme wasn't doing them any favors. They were struggling to execute. I think the coaching changes we're seeing now are having a major impact on the offensive line in the way that the different approach, the different body types, the different types of blockers, and the way that they're mixing the schemes up. There are some different ways that they are running the ball. It is not just a zone blocking scheme, and the variety is helping them. And I think that physicality up front, I really like nothing more yesterday than just watching J.R. Sweezy and DJ Fluker and Justin Britt going to work on that interior, blowing Sue and Donald off the line and creating huge running lanes for the running backs. I thought it was fantastic to watch. I think we can see Jermaine Ifedi has taken some huge step forwards this year, which is a great thing. Dwayne Brown's holding down the left-hand side of the line. George Fant came in and had a big impact. This is a defensive line, Kenny, that, as we all know, has dominated the Seahawks for years, whether it was in LA, St. Louis, or in Seattle. It was always a major mismatch coming up against Donald and co. And the Seattle's offensive line just couldn't cope. And when they beat the Rams, they did it in spite of the fact that they were getting dominated on the line of scrimmage. And yesterday, the complete reverse was true. It was Seattle's offensive line that was setting the tone. It was that line, the Seahawks line, that was having the success on offense. And it's what's created this platform for a great day where they could run the ball with great production. It was setting up the play action. Russell Wilson looked comfortable, really, for the first real time, I think, this season. He looked something akin to his best because the protection was good, because the run had helped, because the play action was working, and it enabled them to make some big explosive plays downfield. I thought it was a really good offensive performance and something that they can build on going forward. If they can keep that level of performance up, they're going to give teams absolute nightmares going into the next few weeks. Nobody's going to look forward to playing them. Sean McVay said in his press conference afterwards that their team was exhausted for the game, and that's what the Seahawks used to do when they were at their best. They used to exhaust teams in Seattle. The team would come out and nearly always lose their next game having gone to Seattle because the physical beating that they would impose on opponents, and that's what we kind of saw this week from the Seahawks. So that's a major positive. I think there are some concerns that I'm sure we'll get onto regarding the defense and the special teams as well, it has to be said. And if they were going to beat the Rams, they needed, I think, all three units to play at a very high level. Sadly, it was the offense really that kind of just matched that need and getting to that very high level. But what a positive performance, and definitely something to build on going forward.
Yeah, you alluded to the defense, and Jared Goff goes 23 of 32, 321 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. One of those interceptions, an end of half Hail Mary. 22 carries for 77 yards and 3 touchdowns for Todd Gurley. Again, he scores a lot of touchdowns in a game, but doesn't pick up a lot of yards per carry. A long of 16, and really. I don't think that anybody would say that Todd Gurley was a main issue here for the Seattle defense. But even then, that being said, one of the things that you think would have given Seattle a huge advantage in the fourth quarter when they gave up 9 points and essentially lost the game that they were, earlier leading 14-10, 24-17, 31-24, and even 31-30 after LA misses the extra point. Was that they were only down to Robert Woods at receiver, and then they had lost Cooper Kupp, they had lost Brandon Cooks, they were using Josh Reynolds, who didn't have a target all year long, so they had limited wide receiver options. Did the Rams, which seems like it'd be a good thing, and then even then I think some of the numbers and some of the play from Trey Flowers was really positive and encouraging. But Tedrick Thompson making his first start at free safety, it seems like maybe Flowers is getting better, and we've talked about him as a 5th round pick that the Seahawks really wanted to have this year. When your evaluation and watching Trey Flowers and now Tedrick Thompson in his 2nd year, knowing that Earl Thomas, these are the guys that are going to be starting for the rest of the year unless something goes wrong. So your thoughts on this first game here against, the best offense in the NFL, the grade or the evaluation that you would give to Flowers and Thompson, especially given that maybe Shaquille Griffin did not have such a good game.
Well, I thought Flowers played really well. I think that Tedrick Thompson had a decent game, given I think it's his first start, wasn't it? And not an easy game to come into. Thought his hit of Brandon Cooks was, a real sort of statement hit, really. And you don't want to see Cooks get injured and go off with a concussion, but that's the kind of physicality that Seattle became known for with Cam Chancellor and the big hitting and having an impact in that way. So I thought, I personally wasn't too bothered about Thompson's performance. I think the big issue on the defense was 2 things. The tackling was really poor, and that was a shame to see. There were too many missed tackles. I've watched the game back a little bit today, and Justin Coleman had probably his worst game in terms of the tackling. At least he had a couple of good pass breakups, but maybe just took a little bit of a step back in this game against, admittedly a very difficult opponent to play against. But the tackling wasn't good enough, and the pass rush was an issue. And it seemed like almost all of the eggs were in the Frank Clark basket. And it was, if Frank Clark can't make a play, then nobody's going to make a play. And that's not a big surprise. Rasheem Green wasn't active because he's still injured. Dion Jordan is just really struggling to have an impact. He wasn't healthy in pre-season, and I don't think he's doing anywhere near enough to warrant any kind of long-term faith. And they don't have anybody else. They don't have the interior pass rusher. They don't have another edge. Mingo can play a bit of Leo as well as the Sam, but he's probably going to be the kind of player that flashes some weeks and is pretty quiet the next. And this was one of his quieter games, I thought. And when we look ahead and we think about what this team can be, and it is a reset year, we have to remember that. They're not going to be. They're absolute. This is not the best of the Seahawks that we're seeing here. I mean, I think that's why the offense, they. It seems to me that they sort of said this season is about fixing the offense and fixing the run, and if they can keep this going, then they've achieved that. And then next off season is going to be about getting some more help on the defense. And it's a great draft class for defensive linemen. On Monday, I published this 30 players list on Seahawks Draft Blog, which is 30 players that have kind of caught my eye, and tried to sort of split them into 4 tiers, with the first tier being players that I think could go in the top 10, and then the last one being players I think could go in the top 50. And it's absolutely dominated with front 7 defenders. So there's going to be a great chance Seattle will be able to find someone in the first round that they like, that can help them either on the defensive line or at linebacker. So that's going to be great. Maybe they can go and get an impact pass rusher. My personal preference would be someone like Jadeveon Clowney, because he's a good age, not even 26 till February. I think he's got that game-breaking ability. If you could put him next to a re-signed Frank Clark and with Rasheem Green, and then maybe get some speed off the edge there as well, or an interior pass rush threat from this draft class, then I think you'd start to say that could be a major strength for the Seahawks. And then the defense, I think, would be able to really have a good go at this Rams offense, because you've really got to either be exceptional in coverage, have a lot of luck, which the Seahawks didn't really have yesterday. There were a lot of sort of fumbles or tip passes that didn't quite go their way. One of the tip passes went to Tyler Higbee for a big gain, if you remember. And the other thing you need to do is pressure them. And Jared Goff had a pretty easy day back there in the backfield, with only a few exceptions, namely thanks to Frank Clark. They need some more pass rush. They need a rotation. Sadly, they're not going to get it to the offseason, though.
There's a few young players to be encouraged by, of course, with this game against the Rams. We've talked about 1 or 2 here and there, especially along the offensive line. But, thinking of that offense again, the Seahawks last year in the 7th round drafted Chris Carson and David Moore, and most 7th round picks never play in the NFL, or maybe they get active for a game or 2. I mean, that's the majority of 7th rounders. And it's pretty phenomenal that the Seahawks right now, in this game against the Rams had 2 who played really well. Chris Carson having his big game and looking like one of the best running backs in the NFL out there, and David Moore, who catches his first NFL passes and 2 touchdowns, and also looked really good out there, pushing Brandon Marshall closer and closer back to being a free agent, I think. And for the Seahawks, looking for receiving options, looking for skill players and talent that they've had a hard time finding in recent years, at least, and taking bigger shots to try and find a wide receiver, to try and find a tight end, someone that can do something in the passing game, trying to trade, trading for Jimmy Graham, trading for Percy Harvin, making these big signings. They've had a hard time finding the next Doug Baldwin, and David Moore, getting cut last year, being on the practice squad, coming in at the end of the year, but not getting any, targets. And then this beginning of this year, making the team. And they've also, kept Keenan Reynolds, or he's been on the practice squad that he brought up. And it's been an interesting journey for David Moore, and it's only been 1 game, but in terms of some of these young guys like Chris Carson, Mike Davis, David Moore, we're not seeing Rashad Penny, and that's got to be somewhat discouraging. Even if Chris Carson and Mike Davis are playing well, it's got to be somewhat discouraging that they used a first-round pick on a player that is not playing right now, especially given the attrition rate of running backs. And it's interesting to see Rashad Penny be active, and then of course we can get into CJ Prosise being inactive, but Rashad Penny being active and not getting any snaps on offense whatsoever. And it does make you wonder, because Chris Carson's still going to be around for a couple more years. Mike Davis can be around for a couple more years. It'll be interesting to see how they plan to move all these places and pieces around moving forward, because it does seem like if you go back to 2013, they kind of botched the Kristen Michael draft pick, and, drafting Michael and, having Marshawn Lynch already in there and thinking, well, at least they'll mix these 2 guys in and maybe Kristen Michael will spell Marshawn Lynch. And that never happened. And then when Marshawn Lynch couldn't play, or if Kristen Michael did come out, it didn't look that good. So in your opinion, looking at some of these skill players, how encouraged are you by, like, say, the play of David Moore? And do you have any concerns about if and when Rashad Penny will be in the mix for Seattle this year?
Well, just start with the Penny thing. No, I'm not discouraged at all, really. I thought Penny looked really good last week. I think that there's a very logical reason why they drafted Penny in the draft. I'll come back to that in a second. But I think what we have to remember here is that we're only a week removed from Chris Carson not being able to play against the Arizona Cardinals. And when you look through his career, I know we've been down this road before. He couldn't stay healthy at Oklahoma State. Had his first season in Seattle ended after 4 weeks because of an injury. And then after one 30-carry game against the Cowboys, he then had to miss another game. He has not proven whatsoever to be capable of a heavy workload. And let's see how he goes on. I mean, in 6 weeks' time, is he still going to be able to do what he did yesterday? That's a big question mark. I think everybody has to ask that question. And yeah, he's played great for a couple of games against the Cowboys and now the Rams. But is he able to do it for 16 games? Major question mark there. Same for Mike Davis. I mean, I think Mike Davis has just been a breath of fresh air for the last couple of weeks. I just love the way that he plays. His attitude, his physicality, the electric cuts that he has. And just this incredible explosive lower body power and agility that he shows for his size. I just think he's been absolutely really fun to watch. Really great to see him out there getting a chance, and I'm happy for him. But we're talking about two players here that let's pump the brakes a little bit before we start saying, well, they're going to be here for a few years yet, and Rashad not see the pathway for Rashad Penny to get into the roster. And sort of to go back with a pick, and I know a lot of people are second guessing the pick now because he's not the one who's running for 100 yards every week. I think we have to remember where the Seahawks were in this offseason, and whether you agree or disagree with this position, I always feel like, and this is the opinion I've always had on this, is that I just want my team, which in this case is the Seahawks, to have a vision and then to build around it. The last thing I want is a Jim Mora wishy-washy kind of don't really know what we're trying to do approach and being absolutely useless like they were in 2009. I want the team, whether they're going to be Sean McVay style or Pete Carroll style, to say this is what we're going to do on offense and defense, and we're going to blooming well build towards it. So when Pete Carroll says we want to run the ball as a feature, that's great. Then do it. Commit to it. That's what you want your vision to be. Then you go for it. And that's what they said in the offseason. The running game has been a shambles for 2 seasons. We have to get this fixed one way or another. And then you look at the draft class. And the draft this year, 2018, was a running back draft. That's where the strength was. It was cornerbacks the year before, very early, if people remember, and it was running backs this year, and it'll be defensive linemen next year. So the Seahawks find themselves, what was it, like pick number 27? I think they traded down from 18, hadn't they? And at that point, only one running back had gone off the board, and it was Saquon Barkley with the top 5 pick. The rest of this class was just sat there waiting for them. And we'd said a lot in the draft season. I'd predicted it a lot, as many others had, that I think there was about 6 players were going to go between the late first and some point in the second round. And that proved to be absolutely correct. There was Ronald Jones, there was Sony Michel, there was Nick Chubb, there was Darius Geis, there was Royce Freeman. People like that were going to go in that range. And the Seahawks found themselves in a position to draft whoever they wanted of the group. And they took their guy. And given that their stated preference was to fix the run, and they had this great wealth of riches, really, that all of the running backs there, they can have whoever they want, and they pick the guy that they want, which for me, I was just a commitment to what they said they wanted to do in the offseason. So the fact now we sit here 5 weeks in and Rashad Penny, the rookie, is not the one leading the way and that 2 others are, is not really much of a concern for me, because the stated aim was to fix the run and they've done it. It'd be nice if we could all guarantee that Chris Carson's going to play out the rest of the season, and Mike Davis for that matter. But I get the sense that as the season goes on, they may well need Rashad Penny. And I think it's a little bit early to be sort of second guessing the pick there, because by the end of the year, who knows? Carson might be injured, Mike Davis might be wearing down, and Rashad Penny might look like an absolutely fantastic decision if it keeps this running game going. In terms of the younger players, just very quickly on that, I think there's a lot of time, Kenny, I'm sure you've noticed this, is spent sort of analysing what the Seahawks haven't done in the draft over the years, which is a lot of wasted third-round picks, the Malik McDowell pick. A lot of people would criticise the Jermaine Ifedi pick, for example. Now Ethan Posic's not starting. But it's very easy to sort of focus on the negatives and not quite as easy to focus on the positives. And you quite rightly state there, they found Chris Carson and David Moore in the 7th round, which at the moment look like 2 fantastic 7th round picks. They've also made some very, very smart moves for me. I mean, I think Will Disley was looking real. What an inspired pick that was before his unfortunate injury in the 4th round. Terrific pick there. You look at, so frankly, we can even go as far as say Frank Clark has proven to be really good value for a late 2nd round pick. I think that you could easily say that Jaron Reed now as a 2nd round pick has looked like a really good decision, a really good pickup for the Seahawks. You can say Justin Coleman, they got him in a trade with the Patriots a year ago. What an inspired decision that was. Trey Flowers looks really good. Shaquille Griffin looks really good. Let's see what Tedrick Thompson has to offer. Michael Dixon, they traded up for him. That looks like a really good move on their behalf. You know, there are some really decent moves here that the Seahawks have made, and not quite enough attention is made to that. And for all the knocking of the offensive line over the years, look what they've done. I mean, signing J.R. Sweezy, what a great pickup that was to get him back and to fit him in at left guard. The Fluker signing has been a revelation, hasn't it, so far? I think that Dwayne Brown, maybe he's not quite a top 5 offensive tackle in the league, but we're not talking about left tackle like we were for the last 2 years, and that trade has at least tied down that position. And Jermaine Ifedi, who knows, in a year's time might have actually developed into one of the better right tackles in the league. He's certainly playing very well for me at the moment. He's not flawless. He still gets beat by really, really good players sometimes, but who doesn't at right tackle or left tackle for that matter? So I think there are some positives to talk about with the Seahawks drafted in recent years. And I think maybe that's forgotten a bit too often just because they've had a few whiffs, which is what every team has, really.
Yeah. And as far as, Rashad Penny, if anyone's curious on my thoughts about using a 1st round pick on him, I've written an article on Field Goals today. You can go to fieldgoals.com to read that, and I won't rehash that. I'll just let people go read that if they choose to. But the Seahawks, they do still have plenty of opportunity in the NFC. The NFC has, no teams that are winless anymore after the Cardinals beat the 49ers. And really the team that's in the 2nd wild card spot right now is the 2-2 Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have maybe the worst defense in the NFL. And when I look at the NFC, I do see a lot of teams that even like when I ask people who are good besides the Rams, they'll say someone like the Saints. And I agree, the Saints can absolutely win the Super Bowl. They can get into a position where their defense gets better, and it doesn't really need to even be great. It just needs to be decent maybe, and their offense could take care of the rest. But the Saints still have it's the worst defense in the NFL is either the Saints or the Bucks, maybe the Falcons, Keanu Neal. So Cam Newton, I'm sure, has another MVP type season ahead of him because he's playing the Saints, Bucks, and Falcons for the rest of the year, and he could just eat up all year long against that slate of defenses. Maybe the 3 worst defenses in the NFL, residing right there in the NFC South. In the NFC North, the Packers don't look great. We've talked about the Vikings ad nauseum on this podcast. They get a win over the Eagles, and the Eagles fall to 2-3. So even the defending champions are 2-3. So it's a very close race in the NFC East, which makes this upcoming game all the more important, even though it's out of conference. The Seahawks get an opportunity. They've got 1 win over the Arizona Cardinals, who are 1-4, and their next opponent, the Oakland Raiders, are 1-4. And hey, you don't necessarily feel the most encouraged by wins over bad teams, but you got to get wins over bad teams. You can't lose to the bad teams. So the Seahawks will be traveling to London to play the Oakland Raiders. They have to beat the Raiders. You can't lose the games that you should win. If they win, they get to 3-3. They go into the bye week. They maybe get Ed Dickson back, who has said on Twitter, he's implied that he'll be back as soon as he's ready to be activated from the NFI, which will be in the bye week in week 7. And they'll get Ed Dickson back. And, there's an opportunity there for Ed Dickson to perhaps play at least as well as Will Disley. And then they'll have another player there. KJ Wright would get 2 more weeks, thing that we haven't really talked about at all in regards to the Seahawks losing to the Rams on Sunday, which is the fact that they did it without Earl Thomas. They lost by 2 points without Earl Thomas and without KJ Wright and without Michael Kendricks. Remember, they didn't have Michael Kendricks was playing really well in the last few weeks, and he gets suspended. Who knows? They lost by 2 points. And they couldn't stop those plays, that were playing right in the area that you might see at KJ Wright or Michael Kendricks. So it was a pretty big, opportunity loss there for the Seattle Seahawks. But if they can get to 3-3 and come back, they could be going in a Week 8 game against the Detroit Lions with an opportunity, to really solidify themselves as being at the top of the heap of, these non-division leaders like the 3-1 Bears and the Panthers. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But Rob, before we get into the specifics maybe of London, looking ahead, we see the Raiders at 1-4. John Gruden's first season with Oakland, back with Oakland. Things aren't going well. Not a lot of sacks. 8 interceptions. Is there anything that you, in terms of just the team on the field that they're putting out there, anything that you especially fear that the Seahawks need to look out for with regards to the Raiders right now?
I don't think there's anything that you would necessarily fear. I think other than the fact that, Marshawn is going to be playing and it's Marshawn, and we all know what he's capable of. So the problem with the Raiders is that you would go into this game saying you've got to win this game. I agree with you there, Kenny. And I think if the Seahawks are going to have any kind of a run in the second half of the season, you can't be dropping to 2-4 and losing to Oakland in a neutral venue. I think that you have to go and win that game. But, I mean, is it beyond the realms of possibility for Derek Carr and Amari Cooper and Marshawn to have a good game? Sadly, it's not beyond the realms of possibility. And equally, they have some pieces on defense that you would fear as well. So it could be perhaps a closer game than maybe some of us expect. But that's the kind of way the Seahawks play anyway. I think it is a game that really, Kenny, if they are going to do anything, they've got to go and win, because off the bye week, they go to Detroit, which I think is looking a tougher game now than it did a couple of weeks ago, because Detroit have beaten New England and Green Bay in their own stadium. So that is going to be a tougher game than perhaps we first thought, and that's going to be the 10 a.m. start as well, I think. Then you've got the Chargers and Phillip Rivers, who's always a difficult opponent, especially we've seen him over the years against the Seahawks have some good games. Then you go into the Rams for the second game against them, which, as we've seen this weekend, is going to be very difficult, and it may be even harder in LA on their turf. You play Aaron Rodgers then on Thursday night on a short week off the back of that Rams game. And yep, the Packers are not playing particularly well at the moment, but that is still, you would never look at a game against Aaron Rodgers and go, well, that's an easy win. It's never going to be that way. Then they go to the Panthers, and after that is quite a difficult run off the back of the bye. When you sort of think about those 5 games, I mean, what would be a fair record when you go into Detroit, to LA, to Carolina, and you're only 2 games at LA, Chargers and Green Bay? I mean, if you won 2 or 3, would that be about right? I mean, possibly so. And then you've got a slightly easier stretch where you play San Francisco minus Jimmy Garoppolo twice. You've got the Vikings at home on a Monday night game, I think that is. That's not going to be easy. But then you finish with the Chiefs and Cardinals. Maybe by that point, the Chiefs have secured some kind of a bye, and I think that could be actually a good time to play the Chiefs Christmas Eve, because if they are sort of already home and hosed and ready in the playoffs, it might not be the worst time to play them. And then finishing up with the Cardinals at home, you would feel confident about that. So basically, the gist is that if they are going to have a chance, I think you've got to beat Oakland and then try and take some momentum into the bye and then try and come out strong. They are going to have to win some more road games, I think. Though I think the home stuff, they're obviously going to be competitive at home. They've got to try and nick some of these away, these wins on the road. The big issue for me, Kenny, is going to be the pass rush. If you're going to not have the Legion of Boom as secondary anymore, and that's not to say that the young secondary players are not playing well, but if you're not going to have that ability to gain an advantage in the secondary, you've got to find a way to pressure people. And when you're playing Stafford Rivers, Goff, Rodgers, Cam in a row with Kirk Cousins and Patrick Mahomes on the horizon, they've got to find a way to get a bit more pressure.
Yeah, I think there's the realistic outlook on those 5 games that maybe the positive is 2-3. But probably the ideal is obviously 5-0, but the ideal realistic, maybe 3-2 if they can go to Detroit, get to 4-3, win their home games. And then if they're 6-5 after 11 games, which is where they've been, I think many times in the past, several times in the past few years, it's something to be encouraged by, with 4 of their last 5 games at home, and then the road game being against San Francisco. So as I think Pete Carroll and, as the Seahawks tend to do, getting better in the final 2 months of the season, which feels like sort of a college mentality, right? In college with Pete Carroll and his 11 years at USC or whatever it was, 10 years at USC, 9, it was always in college you can lose a big game in the beginning of the year. And a lot of times in the national picture, especially at that time, the national championship picture, they'd say, well, USC is 1-1 now, and they have a loss, and they're going to fall to 15 in the rankings. But at the end of the day, if you win the rest of your games, or, you get hot at the right time, that's all that matters. And the Seahawks have played that same way. They start out 2-3, 2-4, 3-3, 5-6, 6-5, and then they lose, and then they win the rest of their games, go into the playoffs hot, and it's not a team that anybody wants to face. And whether that's the Seahawks or somebody else, as always happens every single year, there's a team right now that people are saying is maybe not even a playoff team that'll be like, oh, this is the most feared team in the NFL now. And I don't know, off the top of my head, I don't know, maybe Jacksonville was that way last year, maybe Philadelphia, maybe something like that. But it's something that happens every year. And so for the Seahawks, I think the what you're shooting for there and going into those, after that Carolina game, is 6-5. If you get to 6-5, and you want to be a team that can get to 6-5, that can win, a road game, for sure. And, even as how much different the teams were a year ago. The Rams were not as good, and the Seahawks were maybe a little bit better, but the Seahawks beat the Rams in LA last year. It's always something that can happen. The Seahawks just played the Rams pretty well this week. So, we'll see what happens when we get to that. But certainly I think the road there is like 6-5.
Just sort of thinking about it, I think, after that Carolina game, they've got to be at 5 or 6 wins, I think, because then if you can get, even if it was 5 wins rather than 6 after the Carolina game, then you would be looking at as you mentioned there quite rightly, 4 of the last 5 at home, and the road game is against the Niners, which, they've just lost to the Cardinals at home. They're missing their quarterback. As I mentioned earlier, the Chiefs game, it could be a game where the Chiefs maybe have already achieved what they need to get done, probably won the division, maybe even have got the first round bye. So at that point there, maybe that's a more winnable game as a consequence. And that's it. I mean, if you win those last 5 games, even if you start 5-6, you could get to 10-6, and I think that would be good enough for a wild card berth. So I don't think the fan base will necessarily feel as positive as the way I've described that if they do get to 5-6, Kenny, because a 5-6 record doesn't look particularly good, does it? But if they get to 5-6 off the back of that Carolina game, then they've given themselves an opportunity, and I think that's all we can ask for in a reset year. And to get to 5-6, it means they are going to have to win 3 of the games between themselves and Oakland, Detroit, the 2 LA teams, Green Bay and Carolina, it's a tough run of games, but 3 wins is doable, especially if they beat Oakland straight off the bat. Then even if they just held serve at home against the Chargers and the Packers, they would get to the 5-6 record. So I think that just highlights how important it is to win this Oakland game and give yourselves not as much to do in the following games, which is a bit of a tough stretch.
And moving into some of the specifics on the England the game this week in terms of location, and a lot of people are going to be traveling to the game from Seattle, or Seahawks fans, and maybe they don't know. I mean, sure, a lot of them don't know what they're necessarily in for. This is the Seahawks' first time playing over there. It's going to be an interesting situation for all parties involved. And Rob, you're people might be able to hear it in your voice, but you live over there in the land of England, in the UK. and this is a game of importance, I believe. So in terms of like the milestone, I think. Tell me a little bit about the stadium that they'll be playing in, the field that they'll be playing in. Do you have an expectation in terms of where the fan loyalty will lie? If there are a lot of Seahawks fans, if there's a lot of Raiders fans, if there's just going to be a lot of neutral fans, Jaguars fans. But can you talk a little bit about the environment that the teams will be playing in? Because I think the thing that people may be most interested in is, the stadium, if anybody would have any sort of home field, and the field itself, and if it's going to be one of quality. There's been concerns for just in general, people have concerns with certain places, and especially places that they don't know in terms of injuries. So what would you prepare people for in regards to the game this week?
So I think the Wembley Stadium is a bit of a soulless place. It's a beautiful looking stadium, Kenny, and when you get inside, the views are quite amazing, especially when it's full. I've been there many, many times, either working or just to go and see either an NFL game or a different soccer game or whatever. But do not expect any atmosphere. There will not be this raucous noise. There will not be a home field advantage for either team, even if the stadium was, let's say, 70% Seahawks or 70% Raiders. It's very difficult to generate an atmosphere in that stadium. And the feel and the atmosphere within it will be that of an exhibition game. None of the London games that I've ever been to have been particularly loud. And I think that you have to chalk this down as a bit of a positive. I think if the Seahawks were going to the black hole in California, that would obviously be a very strong home field advantage for the Raiders. The fact that they're having to travel to London, they are completely losing their home field advantage, and the Seahawks get them in a neutral venue where it's going to be pretty quiet when both teams are on the ball. Is a huge plus for the Seahawks. The travel is the same for both teams. There's not really an advantage there. So I do think that this is a net win for the Seahawks. The fact that they're going over to London to play the Raiders there instead of in California. So about the fan bases and what we can kind of expect in the stadium, I think it could be fairly balanced. The NFL in England and in the UK had a bit of a boom period in the 80s and the 90s. So you do see that there's a pretty decent Oakland Raiders, San Francisco 49ers following within this country. Obviously, the Patriots are well supported because of the success they've had. And, people like to follow a winner. But I have to say that since I moved back from I used to live in Vancouver, and when I moved back, the thought of seeing a Seahawks jersey in England was, I was practically the only Seahawks fan in Yorkshire. I think there weren't many others. I never bumped into a random Seahawks fan. Since the Seahawks had a bit of success, and obviously the Pete Carroll era has taken them to a Super Bowl, I've seen tons of Seahawks gear. So I've been walking around the shopping mall in Sheffield, and I've seen Seahawks jerseys. I've seen Seahawks caps and hoodies. I remember opening my curtains in my house in Rotherham one day to see a guy wearing a Russell Wilson jersey just walking down the road. There's a very much a growth of Seahawks fans who've kind of followed the success that they've had. Yeah, they are a bit bandwagony, but we've got to remember these are fans that have probably come to the game in the last 10 years. They're not fans that have been following other teams. It's just that since the Wembley game started, the NFL has found this newfound popularity in this country and has become a much more popular sport than it was when I first came back from Vancouver. And fans have looked for a team to follow and have liked the cut of the Seahawks jib, so they've followed the Seahawks. So I think that you've got the balance there. You've got the old school Raiders fans from the 80s and the 90s, and then you've got the new school Seahawks fans from the last 10 years who are probably going to make for quite an even match of fans in the arena. I'm heading down to London on Thursday morning. There's press conferences before the game. Obviously, I'm going to go and attend those. I'm already sort of thinking what question I'm going to ask Pete Carroll. I'm going to make sure that I try and get a question in there. And then staying down for the game on Sunday and hoping to see the Seahawks win. My record watching the Seahawks is not particularly great, Kenny. At least I don't have to travel thousands of miles to watch them lose this year, if that is indeed the case, but hoping that they're going to win this one, and maybe they'll pick up even a few more British-based supporters along the way as well. And hopefully that's going to be the case, and it's going to be a good experience for all the Seahawks fans in the UK, of which there are many.
Yeah, that's good. Any advice in terms of for people if they're going to be around Wembley Stadium, things to do, bars, to pubs, I suppose, to check out food, anything like that?
So Wembley Stadium, since the Olympics, has become a very different place than it was before. Wembley is a bit of an industrial area. It's the single worst place for a national stadium that you could ever imagine. I mean, it's just plonked in the middle of like a really small part of London, and there's just no space. If I don't know why you would, if you were traveling from America, for example, don't try and park at Wembley. You know, go everywhere by train and the subway. Do not try and park near Wembley because it would be an absolute disaster. If you there's a loads and loads of bars and restaurants and everything around Wembley Stadium. The surrounding area of the stadium is completely different to when I was going there when it was first built. I covered a few games for the BBC there, playoff games and stuff. And essentially there were two hotels outside the stadium. One was called the Quality Inn, which was an ironic name because it certainly wasn't very good. And the other one looked a bit like, I don't know if anyone's ever been on the Hollywood Tower of Terror at Disney World, but it looked a bit like that. Those are long gone now, and there's some new hotels that are a lot better. There's lots of restaurant shops. You know, you're probably about 7 Starbucks around Wembley Stadium. There's loads and loads of places to eat and go for a drink. I'm sure the Seahawks fans will be congregating at many of the pubs that are around Wembley. I'm sure if you look at Google, you'll find those. The train station at Wembley, I would not suggest venturing into Wembley town centre very far. The last time I was at Wembley, Kenny, was in May for a playoff game in the English soccer leagues. And while I was getting some money out of a cash machine, some guy suggested, would I like to buy some pills from him? Which I kindly rejected the offer and went along my way. But that's the kind of place we're talking about here. So I would, if you're sort of in Wembley and you're not staying right next to the stadium, one of the great hotels, I would suggest getting on the subway, getting into downtown London. Of course, it's one of the biggest and best cities in the world. There'll be a million things for you to do there. I suspect if people are coming over from Seattle, they're probably making a week of it, and they'll want to do all the tourist stuff. And there's loads and loads. You'll never fit everything into a week in London. You really probably need about 10 days to do everything. It's so busy. If anybody wants, I mean, you've put the question to me here, Kenny. I've not prepared anything, but if people who are listening to this want any advice, who are Field Goals readers or Seahawks Draft Blog readers who are already, even if you don't read either, but just listen to this podcast, if you want to fire a question my way on Twitter at Rob Staten, I will endeavour to answer that question for you. If it's something about London, if it's about bars, if it's about places to stay, if it's things to do during the weekend, I'm happy to answer those questions and be as helpful as possible. And I would just say, have a great time. You know, it's London is a really good city. I've travelled to different countries and been to a lot of big cities. I've never really been anywhere quite like London. I'm sure you're going to love it. We're a nice bunch over here in England, and I'm sure you're going to have a great time. And let's hope the Seahawks win as well.
Absolutely. And I want to, I had a few things, a couple of things pop into my mind about the Seahawks. So we'll wrap up the Seahawks really quickly here because I just have a few. I want to get your thoughts on a few players and sort of discuss. These players right now seem to be on the bubble of sorts, and just sort of your idea. I don't know when the next time we'll do this podcast is. They'll play the Raiders and then they got to bye a week, so maybe we won't do it for a couple more weeks. And I don't even know necessarily if all these players will be on the roster. One of them I think won't be on the roster, but the other ones are a little bit younger, and I'm kind of curious your thoughts on where they're at right now. But when the Seahawks come back in week 8 after their bye week, would you say that Brandon Marshall will be on the roster, or do you think he won't be? What are your thoughts right now on Brandon Marshall?
My thoughts on Brandon Marshall are probably the same as everybody else's, really. I mean, he's not making plays. He's losing play time to David Moore, who is making plays. And I think if there was a saving to be had there, then they would probably take it. The problem is that his salary is guaranteed now. He's only earning $1 million. He doesn't seem to be causing any issues. I mean, he's not complaining, is he, in the media about his lack of catches? He seems to just be getting on with it. So I just think that I was listening to the 710 ESPN podcast, the Brock and Salt podcast earlier today, and one of the people on the show suggested if Tanner McAvoy can survive, a couple of full seasons on the Seahawks roster, then Brandon Marshall probably can, and that's probably a good way of looking at it. You never quite know when you might just need that veteran experience. So I think he probably will be on the roster, but I'm not holding out much hope of an impact.
A player who, his first 2 years just decimated by injuries mostly. And then this season, injuries again have popped up. But he also, we don't know necessarily if CJ Prosise would be able to play. He's not even in a position to play. We talked about how Rashad Penny can't get on the field. So why would CJ Prosise, even if he was healthy, he's inactive the last couple of weeks, maybe groin injury, whatever. And fans get frustrated. And I always try to encourage fans, like, look past the frustration, see the talent, understand, that Paul Richardson was once a player that you didn't want on this team. 1 or 2 years in, you didn't want Paul Richardson. You were sick of him being on the injury report and getting injured. And people just get so tired of losing those things. But, you got to fight through being tired of it and realize, these cheap players, the long-term benefit, is it better to hold on? But CJ Prosise now, he's only got 1 year left on his rookie deal. He's in his third year. He has played, I don't even know, maybe the equivalent of a few games worth of snaps. It's got to get to the point too, when you've got Carson Davis, Penny, how much longer does CJ Prosise remain as a running back? Do they move him to wide receiver? Is there something else you can do with CJ Prosise? They talked him up all offseason. Brian Schottenheimer claimed that CJ Prosise was someone they were excited to use. And he's not being around right now. And even if he was healthy, I don't know if he would get in. So what are your thoughts right now on the progress of CJ Prosise, but also just where he would even fit on this roster if he was healthy?
Well, I think people need to remember here that the Seahawks have committed to being a run-heavy team, as we've seen in the last 3 or 4 weeks. And as a consequence of that, they're going to need a stable of backs. And especially with Carson not having a long history of staying healthy, and you've essentially got Mike Davis and Rashad Penny there, it makes sense to have the 4 running backs that you like and that you've brought to the team. So I don't think there's anything to be gained really by moving CJ Prosise on for somebody who may or may not work at a different position. And if in sort of 2 or 3 weeks' time, let's say Carson got an injury or Mike Davis or Penny, then you'd be quite grateful for having someone with his talent on the roster. And I get it. It's very frustrating that he keeps picking up these injuries, Kenny. I think we can all speak to that as Seahawks fans and followers. But there's just no reason to move him on. There's just no benefit. You're not making a big saving.
There was one, if I may just quickly interject, only because the only thing I could see coming up is week 9, J.D. McKissick is eligible to return. So there could be an opportunity for a swap of similar players to consider there. Yeah,
that's a possible option. Absolutely. Whether or not, though, it depends on the situation, doesn't it? If all the other 3 backs were healthy and productive, then I could definitely see that being an option there, because McKissick gives you something a little bit different, and Prosise is not having an impact at the moment. So you might be able to use McKissick in a way that you can't with Prosise. But if there's any injury doubt about the others, I think that Prosise is in a much better position to be a lead runner, if you want to call it that, and someone who could take on 20 carries. People are going to say, we'll get injured after 5 carries, but you know what? He's a sturdier build, isn't he? So he could run up the middle. He can do all of that. If you're asking McKissick to do that, then he might get broken in half trying to run up the middle of an offensive line. So I don't think there's any reason to get rid of him, and I think that they're going to keep him.
And I don't think that the Seahawks are going to get rid of this player either, in terms of the investment and the promise and what there is to gain from it. But a year ago, we were talking pretty highly of Nazir Jones and thought of him as maybe, him and Jaron Reed would be the future there, defensive tackle. Jones is 24 years old. And last year, in his very first game, he had that pick 6 with Aaron Rodgers that, was not a 6. And, but it was right there, and you saw the athleticism and that he could get to the quarterback. And now he is fallen, well, it seems well behind Puna forward on the depth chart. Can be a healthy scratch some weeks. Nazir Jones was a guy that, it seemed like the only thing holding him back was injuries, but I haven't seen him in terms of being any injured this season, and he doesn't seem to be playing. He seems to be going backwards in his development from at least the way that we perceived it a year ago. So any thoughts there on Jones?
It's a confusing one because, like I say, I think we all expected him after a decent rookie season to just carry on and at the very least be what he was last season, and he's not. And he's moved behind several players. Poona Ford, Shamar Stephen, obviously well behind Jaron Reed. So yeah, it's disappointing. And only hope is that maybe they tried in the off season, or he lost a bit of weight to be a better pass rusher, and it's just not worked. And he's struggling to get the weight back on, or I don't know, or if it's just, if the others are playing so, I mean, that's the other thing. It's possible that the others are just playing so well, or it could be a situational thing. Maybe in a game like this, they thought we need to stop Todd Gurley, and therefore we're going to play these players because they're better against the run, and maybe Naz will play against Oakland and Poona will sit out because maybe they'll think, do you know what, having a more lighter, better pass rushers better than having another run stopper in this type of game. I don't know, but they are coming up against Marshawn, so maybe that's not the right thing to say. But it might just be a situational thing. But fingers crossed, as the year goes on, he can have more of an impact, because it'd be a real shame to see him play as well as he did as a rookie and then just fade into obscurity.
Yeah, let's wrap up the current Seahawks team. They'll be playing the Raiders this Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So hopefully the Seahawks get back to 3-3. I want to take a quick time here at the end of the episode of 3000 NFL Mock Draft to do some NFL draft type stuff, talking about, college football. Also, I guess I'm already going to lie about what I just said, but because one thing I do want to talk about, not necessarily about the Seahawks directly, but something that you wrote about on SeahawksDraftBlog.com this week, and something that people have been talking about a little bit in terms of looking ahead to next year, is if the Seahawks, have opened up money and aren't re-signing or franchise tagging Earl Thomas, that they could have 15 or 20 or something $1 million on some star player that they at least maybe want to make a push for. And a lot of people talking about Jadeveon Clowney, and I just curious, because you brought him up too, like, do you not expect the Houston Texans to retain Clowney? Do you expect him to be a player that gets out because they're already paying JJ Watt, or is that something that that a lot of people are just maybe just assuming at this point because of Watt or whatever? Do you expect Clowney to be available?
Yeah, I think there's a decent chance of that. I'm just checking now because I don't think that. I just want to make sure that all my facts are right on this. The Houston Texans, did they take up his fifth-year option? Is this the fifth-year option now? I think it is, isn't it? So they've had him for the 5 years. I would be very surprised if they franchised him, because you would be looking at, I'm just looking at the franchise numbers for this year. You're looking at $17 million for a defensive end this year, and bearing in mind that a lot of players have got paid since then. And I remember hearing something earlier that suggested that number could be closer to 20 million to franchise him this year. Mm-hmm. And I just don't see the Houston Texans are they going to go for that? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure that they would be willing to stretch to that. I mean, they have a bit of money this year that they could, if they wanted to do something now, they possibly could have done. I'm just having a look to see how they're tied up for the rest of it. So they're in a similar situation to the Seahawks. I think they've got quite a lot. They've got something like $86 million to spend next year. The Seahawks have got about 60. So if they wanted to do it, they could do it. I think it's just that because he is such a game wrecker and because he's at such a good age, you don't usually see them sort of let it drift this long. So, I mean, there's every chance they could franchise him. There's every chance they could keep him. I just think for me, he's the most appealing one. And I think the Cowboys are going to do everything to keep DeMarcus Lawrence the way that he started this year. I don't have any particular interest in Ziggy Ansah. He's older. It's going to be expensive. He's been injured to start this season. Dante Fowler's another player that gets mentioned and just seems to have had a really weird career year in Jacksonville. I think Clowney's the one that if you could get him, even, I mean, and I'd be happy to spend some money on him. If you put him across from Frank Clark, you've got Rasheem Green in there, and then you get either an interior pass rusher or you get some speed off the edge as well to complement what you've got. You've got a really explosive, dominant-looking defensive line there. The type that if they had that on Sunday, I think they would have beaten the Rams. And it's just an exciting thing to consider. If Clowney is franchised or kept by Houston or he goes somewhere else, the good thing is that this draft class is full of defensive linemen, so they should be able to get at least one. It's just a shame that they don't have another high pick to go and maybe get another in round 2 and be able to focus on the draft rather than having to do something in free agency. I think the fact that they only have 1 first-round pick next year and only 4 picks in the draft in total, and they're unlikely to get any comp picks, means they probably are going to have to be active in free agency.
And let's, wrap it up by, you talking about the fact that whether or not they get Clowney or whatever, if they get out in the free agent, I think everybody wants to, what you said, which is re-sign Frank Clark, sign someone notable at least, and draft somebody early. And it's that draft that a lot of people are focusing on, with a lot of, particularly this being a nice pass rush type draft. And the Seahawks, whether they're going to be picking in the middle or the end or the top of the first round or whatever, there should be options of different varying degrees there. Not likely at this point that they would have any shot at Nick Bosa, because the Cardinals and 49ers exist, and there's definitely worse teams in the NFL right now. So unless Russell Wilson gets hurt, the Seahawks have already won a couple games, so it'd be interesting. Then maybe not that tier, but there's a lot of good names. So in terms of looking ahead and guys that you think are going to outperform maybe their draft spot, anyone that you're looking at there, and I know that you had your eye on someone in particular this weekend. So, what do you want to say about that?
Yeah, there's some really good players that are going to be, and some of the names will be very familiar to people. I don't think the Seahawks are going to have much chance at Nick Bosa, like you said, or Clellan Ferrell or Ed Oliver. These are 3 players that are probably going to be in a top 5. They could go in a top 5 in any particular draft class. It's not just that this year they're the ones who were there. I think if Ferrell had come out this year, he probably would have gone in the top 5. Ditto Bosa and Oliver. So they're destined to be out of range. They're going to go to the teams that win sort of 2 to 4 games this year. Then you've got players like Devin White, a linebacker, incredible athlete, fantastic consistency, really good player for LSU. I think Christian Wilkins at Clemson is going to go a lot earlier than some others believe. I just think he's too freaky in terms of his athleticism, great character, has had a great year so far, and is an interior pass rusher. There aren't too many of those, so I think he's going to go very, very early. And I think Brian Burns at Florida State is a player that doesn't get anywhere near as enough attention as he should do. He's just having an incredible year, Kenny. Just fantastic season so far. He's got 9 sacks and 9.5 TFLs already on a bad Florida State team, and he just looks like the real deal, and I think he's going to go in the top 10 if he keeps this up. So they're kind of the players that I don't think they've got much of a chance at. Then you look at some of the others. I could easily see Dexter Lawrence and Raekwon Davis getting into sort of the top 12 range, and again, perhaps being out of range for the Seahawks if they have more than 8 wins. But I think the player that is possibly most intriguing at the moment, and some of those other names that I mentioned there would be equally as good if they were around, is a guy called Jahshai Polite from Florida. And I was watching him this weekend, and what a game he had against LSU. And Florida have they have Zuniga on one side and they have Polite on the other. There were 2 really good pass rushers, both eligible for the draft next year. And it was interesting to see that LSU double-teamed Polite every single time. They left Zuniga and he had an impact because he was 1v1 all day. And Polite got the double team. They chipped him. They put 2 blockers in front of him. There's a tight end in there. The running back could come across and help out. And Polite still made plays. He was just relentless in the backfield. Great spin move to force a pressure on one play. He can beat you for speed off the edge. He's so quick. He's got a repertoire. His effort is unbelievable. He just plays this hair on fire. And it's that quickness. You just look at him and you think, this guy's going to have a great 10-yard split. He's going to get in the 1.5s. That's what it looks like anyway on tape. And that's perhaps something that they're missing a little bit at the moment. Frank Clark's an explosive pass rusher. If they got someone like Clowney again, you're talking explosive, big, freakish ability. Rasheem Green's more of a bigger type, isn't he, than necessarily a quicker, linear type of guy. And Polite has just got that explosive speed, that raw speed to get to the quarterback. And I think that's something they're going to look for. I think speed is something they're missing in that front seven, aside from the obvious one, Bobby Wagner. So I think that's going to be a possible target for them. And I just think Ja'Shea Polite could be someone that they really zone in on in the first round. He is going to have to match, we know what they like by now. We know what they like from pass rushers. He's going to have to be very, very athletic. He's going to have to be long, but someone to keep an eye on. And then just a few other names for now that I think could be worthy. DeAndre Walker at Georgia, talked about him before. Really like him as a Sam Leo type, really aggressive player. You've got Derek Brown, who's like a 1 or a 3 technique inside. Rashawn Gary flatters to deceive sometimes at Michigan, but another really good defensive line prospect, has got great physical abilities and maybe his best footballs to come. Draymond Jones, defensive tackle at Ohio State. Perhaps nobody's done more than him to improve his stock this year. Really athletic and quick, and has lived in the backfield this year. Just a little bit worried about his run defense. And then maybe a little bit further down, you're looking sort of late first round. You've got players like Zach Allen at Boston College. Really quick for his size. He's having a fantastic season for Boston College, but his testing is going to be important. Isaiah Buggs has got, I think it's 6 sacks, 6.5 TFLs, more of a run defender, but is adding some pass rush this year as well. Austin Bryant is the other name from the Clemson quartet, who's having a really strong season again. Maybe a little bit quiet in the last couple of weeks, but as generally around the ball. And you've got players like Josh Allen, Kentucky stand-up rush linebacker, could be a Sam Leo. Joe Jackson's having a productive year for Miami, pure defensive end there. And Jerry Tillery from Notre Dame is just racking up the TFLs, which is not easy to do from his position at defensive tackle, and playing some of that one technique there as well. 9 TFLs from him already, which is, for a season, that'd be a good number for a defensive tackle. But to have it, I mean, we're not even halfway through the season so far in college football. So to have that number is really impressive. And this is the good thing. Kenny, I think anybody coming out of that game against the Rams on Sunday would say the Seahawks probably in the off-season are going to be looking at defensive line and front seven. This draft is tailor-made for that. And as I mentioned before, it's just a shame that they don't have that second round pick to potentially go and get a couple of good front seven defenders from this class.
Well, we'll see what happens over the ensuing 11 games. Oh, man, we are tearing through the 2018 season. I still hope that the Seahawks, that includes some playoff games, because it's just a long offseason. You never know what's going to happen in 2019. So let's see the Seahawks, get out there, beat the Raiders, get to the bye week, get healthy. Didn't mention the fact, another thing, just Doug Baldwin has not been present in this offense at all. And they still, have done some things right. And just imagine the difference in this offense if Doug Baldwin had been there, if he had been healthy. And he really just looks like he cannot contribute at a high level right now. But if they can get there in the second half, if there's some healing, if you're looking at an offense with Tyler Lockett, who is breaking out, Russell Wilson, Chris Carson, Mike Davis, getting Rashad Penny mixed in there, Doug Baldwin, David Moore, Ed Dixon, a much better offensive line. Maybe the Seahawks offense can be something worth watching over the rest of the season. And defensively, if they can get KJ Wright back, if they can get some more, Frank Clark sick this week, lost 12 pounds, still gets out there. They get healthier with Frank Clark. If Deion Jordan manages to find his way back into being a productive pass rusher like he was in his 5 games last year, the progress of Jaron Reed into being a Pro Bowl type defensive tackle. I don't know if he's a Pro Bowl quite yet, but he looks like he's, making himself much more known there in both the pass rush and run defense. The progress of Trey Flowers, the fact that, Shaquille Griffin and Justin Coleman had unusually bad games this week, and hopefully they play better, maybe some more experience from Tedrick Thompson, the progress of Bradley McDougald. I got plenty of positive things to say about the Seahawks, but I'll have a lot more positive things to say if they can just get a blowout win over the Raiders and really feel like they got a big win with no hiccups. Just have a good win, 4 quarters. The Raiders are terrible. Make it known. If you have questions about London, if you're traveling to the game, you can fire them off at Rob Staton, Staton. You can also ask me, and I'll tell you I don't know. And that's at Field Goals or at Kenneth Arthur S. Go to SeahawksDraftBlog.com to read a lot of the stuff that we talked about this week. Get yourself a little bit more educated on some of those college players that Rob was talking about. And FieldGoals.com, for other Seahawks news. And, that, again, you can get a little bit more info on what my thoughts are on the way the Rashad Penny pick is working out so far right now. That's it. So for this podcast, 3000 NFL Mock Draft, you can subscribe on iTunes at Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur, or just find it on Field Goals or Seahawks Draft Blog. All right, that's enough. This has been this episode of the show. Come back next time for a brand new draft.